There's a moment in everyone's life where everything changes. A single day, a single decision, and you never see it coming. But this story starts with a lie. A beautiful lie that protected me for exactly 16 years. My name is Marcus. And when I was 16 years old, I had everything a kid could want. I'm not talking about being rich. I'm talking about being loved. Or at least I thought I was. My father, Charles Mitchell, was a businessman. Not just any businessman. He was one of the most successful real estate moguls in the country. When people heard his name, they thought of penthouse apartments, luxury developments, and a man who never lost. He had that kind of presence, you know. The kind where everyone in the room straightens up when he walks in. He was tall, confident, always impeccably dressed. His watch cost more than most people's cars. His office overlooked the entire city from the 50th floor of a building he owned. But to me, he was just Dad. We lived in this massive house and, I mean massive. 8 bedrooms, a private cinema, a swimming pool that looked like it belonged in a resort. The kind of place you only see in magazines. My mother, Victoria, was equally impressive. She came from old money, the kind of family where ancestors are mentioned in history books. She was beautiful in that effortless way, always at charity galas, always smiling for cameras, always the picture of grace. I had 2 older brothers, David and Richard. David was studying law at an Ivy League university. Richard was already working in our father's company, learning the business from the ground up. They were perfect. Brilliant, ambitious, everything my parents had always wanted. And then there was me. I was the youngest, the unexpected one. My parents had David when they were in their 20s, Richard a few years later. They thought their family was complete. And then I arrived when my mother was 42. I was never supposed to happen. But I did. My father used to joke about it. He'd put his arm around me and say, "Marcus, you're my beautiful surprise. The best investment I never planned to make." I believed him. Every single time, I believed him. My childhood was like something out of a movie. Private schools, where the tuition costs more than most houses, tennis lessons from professional coaches, vacations to places with white sand beaches and crystal clear water. My father would take me to his office sometimes, and I'd sit in his leather chair spinning around, thinking about how one day I'd be like him, powerful, respected, rich. My mother threw birthday parties that featured live entertainment. For my 14th birthday, she hired a band, an actual band. They played on our lawn while catering staff walked around with trays of champagne and fancy appetizers. My friends thought I was the luckiest person alive. Sometimes I'd catch them just staring at our house, at the infinity pool, at the tennis court, and I'd feel this small surge of pride. This was my life. This was normal for me. But here's what I've learned about paradise. It's always built on something fragile. A lie. A secret. An illusion that can shatter the moment someone decides it's not worth keeping anymore. I was 16 years and 3 months old when it happened. It was a Tuesday. I remember because I had tennis practice after school, and I was thinking about how much I hated Tuesdays. My coach was ruthless on Tuesdays. He'd make us drill serves for an hour straight until our arms felt like they were going to fall off. I came home around 6 in the evening. The house was quiet in that way it gets when nobody's really expecting company. I dropped my bag by the door, something my mother would have scolded me for if she'd been there, and headed to the kitchen for a snack. I was absolutely starving. I heard voices coming from my father's study. His door was closed, but the voices were raised enough that I could hear them through the walls. One was my father. The other was my mother. They were fighting about something. They didn't fight often, so when they did, it was loud. I stood in the hallway, knowing I shouldn't listen but unable to move. There's something magnetic about conflict, isn't there? Even when you're a kid, even when you know you should walk away, you're drawn to it like a moth to a flame. "This is insane, Charles," my mother was saying. Her voice was sharp, angry in a way I'd never heard before. "You can't keep doing this to him. He's starting to figure things out. He's 16, Victoria. He's not figuring anything out. It's not stupid. And neither am I. I'm done. I can't keep living this lie. I pressed my ear against the door, my heart starting to beat a little faster. What lie? What were they talking about? If you do this, my father said, and his voice had changed. It was cold now, controlled. The voice he used in business when he was about to make a decision that would destroy someone. If you push this, you need to understand the consequences. What consequences, Charles? You going to threaten me? You're going to threaten your own wife? I'm going to protect what's mine. There was silence. A long, terrible silence. And then I heard footsteps. They were coming toward the door. I jumped back, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. The door opened, and my father stepped out. He saw me standing there, and something in his face changed. I saw it. That flicker of calculation. That moment where he was deciding what to do about the fact that I'd been listening. "Marcus," he said, and he smiled. It was his regular smile, the one he gave to people at dinner parties. But his eyes didn't match it. "How was school?" "Fine," I said. "Because what else do you say?" "I was just getting a snack." "Good, good." He put his hand on my shoulder. His grip was firm. "Why don't you head up to your room? I need to talk to your mother about something." "Okay," I said, and I left. But I didn't go to my room right away. I went to my mother's sitting room. Its beautiful space decorated in pale blues and whites where she spent her afternoons. Reading or writing notes to her charity committee friends, I sat on her velvet couch, and I tried to piece together what I'd heard. What lie? I didn't know it then, but I was about to find out. And my entire life was about to collapse. That night, nobody mentioned anything. We had dinner as a family, and it was strange and stiff in a way that made my skin crawl. David was home from university for the week, and he kept talking about his classes, trying to fill the silence. Richard was on his phone, barely paying attention. My parents exchanged looks across the table, looks that I now understood meant something. Looks that I should have tried to understand weeks ago. After dinner, my father asked me to come into his study. My stomach did a flip. I was 16. I'd done okay in school. I wasn't in trouble. So why did it feel like I was? I followed him into that massive office with the floor-to-ceiling windows and the mahogany desk that probably cost more than a car. He sat behind it. He didn't ask me to sit, so I stood. "Your mother and I have something we need to tell you," he said. I said nothing. I just waited. "Sit down, Marcus." I sat. He took a long time before he spoke again. I watched him, trying to read his face, trying to figure out what was coming. My father was good at many things, but emotions weren't really one of them. He kept them locked away, neat and organized like everything else in his life. "You're not my biological son," he said. I think I stopped breathing. The words didn't make sense at first. They were English words. I understood each one individually, but together they formed a sentence that didn't compute in my brain. "What?" I heard myself say, but it sounded like it was coming from very far away. "Your mother had an affair," he continued, and his voice was flat, emotionless. "Years ago, before you were born, you're not my son. Biologically speaking." I felt the room tilt. I gripped the arms of the chair to steady myself. "Your brothers don't know," he said, "and they're not going to know. Neither is anyone else outside this family. This stays between us. Understood?" But I couldn't even form a complete sentence. My brain was moving in slow motion. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because your mother thinks it's time you knew the truth." I disagreed, but she's insisted. I wanted to ask him 1,000 questions. I wanted to know who my real father was. I wanted to know how long he'd known. I wanted to know why he was telling me this like he was informing me about a change in the stock market. But what came out was, "Does this mean you're not my dad?" He looked at me, and for just a second I saw something flicker across his face. A crack in that perfect, controlled exterior. But it closed up just as quickly. "I've raised you for 16 years, he said. "I've paid for your schools, your homes, everything you've ever had. In every way that matters, I'm your father. And that's not going to change. But legally, biologically, I'm not. That's what your mother wanted you to know." I stood up. I needed to move. I needed to not be sitting in that chair anymore. I need to think, I said. Of course, he replied, and he turned back to his computer like we'd just finished discussing something trivial. Like he hadn't just dismantled my entire understanding of who I was. I left the study in a daze. The house that had felt so familiar, so perfect, suddenly felt like a museum. Like I was walking through a place that wasn't really mine. None of it was mine. None of it belonged to me. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bed, in this room with its designer furniture and its view of the garden, and I thought about everything. Every moment with my father. Every time he'd told me he was proud of me. Every time he'd said I was his surprise, his unexpected investment. Had any of it been real? The next morning, I wanted to talk to my mother. I found her in the garden where she was arranging flowers for the dining room table. She was wearing a silk robe and sunglasses, even though it wasn't particularly sunny. She looked fragile. I'd never noticed that before. "Why did you tell him?" my father asked her. I didn't hear the beginning of the conversation, but I could hear this part from the hallway, my heart sinking further with each word, because he deserved to know. He didn't deserve anything. He was happy before. Wasn't he happy? That happiness was built on a lie, Charles. I couldn't keep lying to him. And what did it accomplish? Now he's miserable and he knows the truth. Congratulations, you've destroyed his childhood. My mother said something in response, but I didn't hear it. I'd already backed away from the doorway, pressing myself against the wall. I felt sick. That afternoon, my father called me into his study again. This time he was different, quieter, more controlled. "I want you to understand something," he said. "What happened between your mother and me, that was a long time ago. We've worked through it. We're fine. This doesn't change anything about our family. But I need you to listen to me carefully." I was listening. I was always listening, it turned out. Listening to things I wasn't supposed to hear, listening to secrets, listening to the lies that held my whole world together. "The world is not kind to weakness," he continued. "People will use anything they can against you. If anyone finds out about this, if anyone knows that you're not really my son, it will matter to them. Doesn't matter if it shouldn't. It will. So we keep this quiet. We keep this as a family secret. Understood?" "Yes," I said, but I wasn't sure I understood anything anymore. The days after the revelation were some of the strangest of my life. Nothing looked different, but everything had changed. My father took me to work sometimes, like he always did. But now when he introduced me to people as his son, I felt the word like a knife. His son? Not really. My mother tried to act like nothing had happened. She'd invite me to lunch with her friends. I'd sit at their tables in fancy restaurants while they talked about charity and gossip and upcoming galas. She'd put her hand on my arm sometimes, a gesture that used to feel warm and safe. Now it felt like she was trying to hold me together, like she was afraid I might fall apart if she wasn't holding on. David and Richard had no idea. I watched them interact with our father, watched how he taught Richard about the business, watched how he bragged about David's academic achievements. I wanted to hate him. I wanted to feel angry all the time. But the truth was more complicated than that. I was angry, but I was also hurt. I was confused. I was 16 years old, and my entire identity had been ripped away. School became this strange place, where I had to pretend everything was normal. My friends didn't know. My teachers didn't know. To everyone on the outside, I was still Marcus Mitchell, son of Charles and Victoria Mitchell, youngest brother to David and Richard. I had the right clothes, the right accent, the right background, but inside, I felt like a fraud. 3 months after the revelation, something changed in the house. The tension that had been simmering beneath the surface started to boil over. My parents argued more. Not in front of us, but we could hear them through the walls. Late at night, in their bedroom, their voices would rise and fall. I never could hear exactly what they were saying, but I understood the tone. My mother was unhappy. My father was angry. 6 months after that Tuesday when everything fell apart, I noticed my mother was spending more time in her sitting room. She'd close the door and spend hours in there, Sometimes I'd hear her on the phone, but she'd hang up immediately if I came near. Once, I went in looking for her, and she was crying, just sitting there on that beautiful velvet couch, tears running down her face. "Mom," I said. She jumped up, wiping her eyes. "Oh, Marcus, I didn't hear you come in. Are you okay?" She gave me a smile that was clearly fake. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired." She wasn't fine, and I knew it. And I didn't know what to do about it. That's when the arguments in my parents' bedroom got louder. One night I heard my mother say something that made me freeze. "I'm leaving him," she said. "I can't do this anymore." "You're not leaving him," my father replied, and his voice was ice. "You're going to stay here. You're going to play your role, and you're going to keep your mouth shut about all of this. Is that clear?" "Charles, this is ridiculous. I have my own life." "I have my own. You have what I've given you," he cut her off. "Everything you have, everything you are, is because of me. You think you can just walk away? You think you can take the kids and embarrass me? You think anyone will believe your side of the story? You're Victoria Mitchell. Everyone knows you, and everyone knows that leaving your husband would be the biggest scandal of the season. Is that what you want? Because that's what's going to happen if you push me on this." Silence. "I thought so," my father continued. "We're staying together. We're staying in this house. We're going to keep playing house for the world, and nobody's ever going to know that things are different. And in about a year, after Marcus is settled in university, maybe we can revisit this conversation. But for now, you're staying. And you're going to smile at the next charity gala, like the happy wife everyone thinks you are." I heard my mother crying after that, quiet, muffled sobs that made my chest hurt. I realized that my mother was trapped, and somehow that made me angry at her too, which I didn't understand. She'd been the one to tell me the truth. She'd been the one to break everything. But listening to her trapped in a marriage with a man who was blackmailing her with the life he'd given her made me realize something. My father had power over all of us. He could take it away at any moment. The house, the money, the life. He could destroy us all if he wanted to, and he wanted us to know it. Around that time, I started noticing other things about my father. The way he spoke to people, not just my mother, but business associates, staff, even us. There was a coldness to it, an assumption that he was better than everyone else, that the rules didn't apply to him because he had money. I'd idolized this man my entire life. I'd wanted to be like him, and now I was starting to see him clearly for the first time, and what I saw made me sick. It's strange how you can live in a house and not really see it. My childhood home had always felt like a palace, but now I walked through it and saw only the cracks. Metaphorical and literal. My 17th birthday came and went. My mother threw a party, but the joy had gone out of it. She went through the motions, the cake, the decorations, the smile for the camera. But it was hollow. My father showed up, gave me a watch that cost more than most people's monthly salary, and told me I was becoming a man. The words felt empty. David pulled me aside that night and asked if everything was okay. He said, "I seem different." I almost told him. I was so close to telling him about Mom, about Dad, about the whole twisted thing. But I didn't. I couldn't. My father's words were stuck in my head. "Keep this quiet. It stays between us. Nobody can know." A month after my birthday, something happened that changed everything. My father threw a big party, not a personal celebrational business event. He was launching a new development project, and half the city's elite were invited. My brothers came. My mother came, looking stunning in a gown that probably cost thousands of dollars. I came playing my role as the perfect Mitchell's son. I remember standing in our home because that's what I still called it. Even though I'd started to understand it wasn't really my Nand watching my father work the room, he was in his element. Laughing with the right people, making the right deals, being exactly who he needed to be to keep everyone impressed. My mother was with him, on his arm, smiling that smile. The one I'd started to understand wasn't real. That's when I saw them, a man and a woman, standing near the window overlooking the garden. The woman was stunning tall, elegant, with red hair and this presence that made everyone around her seem to fade away. The man was also striking athletic, with an easy smile and kind eyes. I didn't think much of it at first. The house was full of impressive people. But then, I noticed my father watching them, and his jaw was tight in a way I'd only seen when he was angry or making a difficult business decision. I watched as he excused himself from the conversation he was having and made his way across the room toward them. I don't know why I followed him. Some instinct, maybe? Some warning bell that had started ringing in my head. "Robert," my father said, shaking the man's hand. His voice was friendly, but there was an edge to it. "I didn't know you were in the city, Charles," the man replied, and there was something in his voice, too. Not quite warmth. I wasn't planning to be. But when I heard about the development, I wanted to see what you were up to these days. Is that right? My father's grip tightened on the man's hand. "And your companion?" "This is Alina," Robert said. "An old friend." That's when my father turned to look at the woman, and his face went absolutely white, like someone had pulled all the blood out of his head. "Alina," he said, and his voice was different now, shaken. "Hush, Charles," the woman replied. She didn't smile. She didn't extend her hand. She just looked at him, and there was something in that look that was absolutely devastating. "I had no idea you were still in contact with ... My father started, but he trailed off because he was suddenly very aware that there were people watching this interaction. The smile was back on his face, but it was cracked now, broken. "There's a lot you don't know," Robert said. He looked at the woman Elena, and something passed between them. Some understanding. I stood there watching this play out, understanding that I was witnessing something important. Something that mattered. My father excused himself, claiming he needed to check on something with the catering. But I watched him retreat to his study. After about 5 minutes, I followed him. He was on the phone when I walked in. He didn't hear me at first. "I need to know why he's here," he was saying, "and I need to know what she's told him. No, I don't care about old promises. This is different. This is... Just find out, okay? Find out now." He turned and saw me standing in the doorway. He hung up the phone immediately. "Marcus," he said, "I didn't hear you come in. Who is that?" I asked. "Nobody. Business." "Who's Alina?" He went very still, and then he moved toward me, and his face was hard in a way I'd never seen before. "That is not someone you need to be concerned about," he said, his voice low and controlled. "That is not a question you ask again. Is that understood?" I nodded because I didn't know what else to do. "Good," he said. "Now go back out there and enjoy the party. And don't mention any of this to anyone, especially not your mother." But of course I couldn't help it. The next day, I asked my mother about Alina. I described the interaction, and I watched her face change. She went very pale. "Where did you hear that name?" she asked me. "At the party yesterday. Dad was talking to someone named Robert, and there was a woman named Alina with him. Something happened, and Dad looked like he'd seen a ghost." My mother sat down very slowly. She was quiet for a long time, and then she said something that would echo through the rest of my life. "Oh my God, she came back." "Who came back?" I asked. My mother looked at me, and her eyes were filled with tears. "The reason I had an affair," she said quietly. "She was the reason your father and I almost ended. She was the reason he wanted you to never know the truth. Because if the world found out about Alina, if they found out what she meant to him, what he did to keep you, everything would fall apart." That's when I realized this family had secrets stacked on top of secrets, and they were all about to come crashing down. I forced my mother to tell me the whole story. She'd been avoiding it for months, but seeing Alina had broken something in her. She couldn't keep it locked away anymore. She told me everything, and with each word, the man I'd called father for 17 years became someone I didn't recognize. My mother and father had been married for about 10 years when Alina came into the picture. She was young, just 25, when she started working as my father's assistant. Beautiful, brilliant, with this spark that apparently made everyone around her feel more alive. My father became obsessed with her. Not just romantically, though. It was that too, but completely consumed. Alina was my father's biological child. "What?" I said, but my mother had already continued. She's the result of an affair he had before he was married, my mother explained. Years ago, with a woman named Catherine. Catherine refused to let Charles have any part of Elena's life. She didn't want his money, his name, his influence. She just wanted nothing to do with him. My mother told me that when Elena turned 25 and took the job working for my father, it was no accident. Elena had known who he was the whole time. She'd sought him out deliberately. She wanted to know her father, and your father, my mother continued. He became completely addicted to having her in his life. He spent money on her. He gave her preferential treatment. And yes, he had a sexual relationship with her. I felt physically sick hearing this. When I found out, my mother said I was devastated. I was going to leave him. I was going to divorce him and take David and Richard with me. I didn't want my children growing up around that. But Charles, he begged me not to. He said Elena didn't mean anything, that it was a moment of weakness that he'd ended. But he didn't, I said. No, my mother confirmed. He didn't. He ended it physically, but he didn't end it emotionally. And I was so exhausted by the whole thing that I decided the lesser evil was to have an affair myself, to do something that would make us even, to somehow level the playing field so I could forgive him. That's why I was born, I said, understanding suddenly. You had an affair to get back at Dad, and I was the result. My mother looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. I'm not proud of it, she said quietly. But yes, I slept with someone, and I became pregnant. And your father and I made a deal. We would both move forward from our indiscretions. We would raise you as his son. And we would never speak of either of it again, till 6 months ago. Till 6 months ago, she confirmed. When I realized I couldn't live the lie anymore. Why did Elena come back now? I asked after all this time. That's the thing, Marcus, my mother said. Elena never really left. She's been in your father's life the entire time, working for his company, advising on deals, living in a penthouse apartment that he pays for. Your father has maintained this secret relationship with her for nearly 8 years, and somehow he's kept it hidden from everyone. I thought about that. 8 years. My entire adolescence, father had been maintaining a secret relationship with his daughter, his biological daughter, while keeping a wife and other children in the dark. What about Robert? I asked. Robert is Elena's husband, my mother said. She married him about 3 years ago. Your father. He didn't take it well. He tried to convince Elena not to go through with it. When that didn't work, he had people investigate Robert. He found dirt on him, nothing serious, just enough to discredit him if necessary. But Elena went through with it anyway. So they came back to town, to this party, and Elena wanted to show your father that she was happy without him, that she'd moved on. Something like that, my mother said. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I kept thinking about everything I'd learned. My father wasn't just a successful businessman. He was someone who thought he could bend the world to his will. He'd broken his marriage vows. He'd hidden an entire secret relationship. He'd manipulated and controlled the people around him. And he'd done it all while sitting in that office on the 50th floor. Making deals and building his empire, he'd told me that I needed to learn to use power. That power was the only thing people respected. Watching him exercise his power, I realized he was a monster. 2 weeks after that party, everything exploded. My father came home early one afternoon, and he was furious in a way I'd never seen. His face was red, and he was slamming things down on the kitchen counter. Where's your mother? He demanded. Upstairs, I think, I said. He practically ran up the stairs. I followed him. I know I shouldn't have, but I did. They fought. God, they fought so hard. I won't repeat the things they said to each other because it was brutal and personal and the kind of vicious that comes from people who know each other too well, who know exactly where to cut. My father told her that Elena had gone to the press. She'd given an interview to a major publication about her experience as the secret daughter of a powerful businessman. She'd detailed the affair with my mother, the way he tried to control her life. She'd told the world about Robert and about how my father had investigated him. She'd told them about the apartment, the money, the hidden bank accounts. The story was running in tomorrow's paper. National news. Everyone would know. My mother had known. She'd encouraged Elena to go to the press. She'd helped arrange the interview. "You did this?" my father said, and his voice was so cold that I almost didn't recognize it as coming from him. "You destroyed our family. You destroyed everything." "I freed us," my mother replied. "I freed all of us. Freed us." My father laughed, and it was the scariest sound I'd ever heard. "You've destroyed us. You've made us a laughingstock. You think the papers care about my love story with Alina? They care about the scandal. They care about the fact that I'll look like a fool. And you are the one who did this." He raised his hand, and for a second, I thought he was going to hit her. I moved without thinking. I stepped forward and I got between them. "Don't," I said. My father looked at me like I was something he'd found on the bottom of his shoe. "Get out of my way, Marcus." "No." We stood there, facing each other, and something changed between us in that moment. He realized that I wasn't his puppet anymore. I wasn't going to obey without question. I wasn't going to accept his version of the world. "If you don't want to live in this house," he said slowly, "then you can leave." "What?" my mother said. "You heard me," he replied, still looking at me. "You think you're so brave standing up to me? You want to be a man? Then act like one. Leave. Get out of my house. Make it on your own." "Charles, he's 17, my mother started. "I don't care if he's 5, my father said. "He crossed me. He made his choice." That's when my father told me to get out. And when I refused, when I said I wasn't going anywhere, he made it very clear he would destroy me. He would take everything away, and there was nothing I could do to stop him. I left that night. I didn't have much. A backpack with some clothes, about $300 in my wallet, and a phone that my father would cut off within hours. My mother tried to stop me, but I couldn't stay. Something inside me knew that if I stayed, I'd become part of the machinery. Part of the machine that my father used to crush people. I thought I had a plan. I didn't. I was 17 years old, and I'd never had to take care of myself in my entire life. Everything had been provided for me. Food, shelter, clothes, education. I'd never paid a bill. I'd never bought my own groceries. I'd never done anything that didn't have a safety net attached to it. The first night, I stayed in a hotel. The kind of place that doesn't ask too many questions and rents by the night. It cost $60. That seemed fine at the time. I didn't think about the fact that I could only afford to stay there maybe. 5 more nights before my money ran out, I called my mother that night. She told me that my father had fired me. I was confused. I had never worked for him, so how could he fire me? But she explained, he'd cut me off from the family trust. He'd removed me from his will. He'd made it clear that I was no longer his son, and anybody who helped me would face his wrath. My brothers didn't call. David didn't call. Richard didn't call. My extended family didn't call. Apparently, my father had made it clear that contacting me was not advisable if they wanted to maintain their relationship with him. By the end of the first week, I was desperate. I found a job at a cleaning company. The boss didn't ask many questions. I said I was going to college and needed work, and he hired me on the spot. The pay was minimum wage, which was nowhere near enough to cover the hotel costs and food and everything else. But it was something. I lasted 3 nights in the hotel before I couldn't afford it anymore. I slept in my car-used sedan that I'd bought with the last of my money for a week. And then I couldn't afford to keep the car because I needed the money for food. I was 18 years old, living in shelters and on the streets of a city where I'd once owned a mansion. The irony was not lost on me. The cleaning company work became my life. Wake up at 4 in the morning, take the bus to wherever I was assigned that day, work until evening, come back, sleep in shelters or on the streets, repeat. Over and over and over. Months became a blur. I cleaned office buildings at night. I cleaned restaurants in the early morning. I cleaned bathrooms in shopping malls and train stations. The work was back-breaking and humiliating, and I hated every second of it. But it kept me alive. There were moments, dark moments, when I'd be on my hands and knees, scrubbing a toilet, and I'd think about my father in his penthouse office. I'd think about how he was probably looking at news about his business deals. Probably making millions while I was making minimum wage scrubbing other people's filth. The anger would bubble up inside me until I thought I'd explode. But I couldn't afford to explode. I couldn't afford to break down. I could only afford to keep moving forward after about 8 months. I managed to save enough money for first month's rent and a deposit on a tiny studio apartment. It was in a bad neighborhood with thin walls and a landlord who didn't maintain anything. But it was mine. I had a door I could lock. I had a shower I could use without being watched. I had a space, however small, that was just for me. But the rent took up most of my paycheck. I was earning about $1,400 a month, and the apartment cost $800. That left me $600 for everything else: food, transportation, phone, utilities. It was barely enough. I was constantly stressed about money, always calculating, always worried that one emergency would destroy me. I dropped out of college. I'd gotten into a decent state school on my father's reputation and recommendations. Recommendations he apparently never rescinded. But I couldn't afford it. After the first semester, when I realized there was no way I could pay for both rent and tuition, I just stopped going. Years blurred together. By year 2, I was working at multiple cleaning jobs. During the day, I'd work for the commercial cleaning company. At night, I'd do residential cleaning for people who paid cash under the table. On weekends, I'd work at a restaurant, bussing tables and washing dishes. I was working 14-hour days, 7 days a week, and I was still barely scraping by. I saw my mother once during those first years. I ran into her at a grocery store when I was buying whatever was on sale. She looked shocked to see me. I was thin, worn down, and I wasn't taking care of my appearance the way I used to. She tried to hug me, but I pulled away. I didn't want her pity. I didn't want her to see what I'd become. "Marcus," she said, and her eyes filled with tears. "Please, let me help you. Does Dad know you're talking to me?" I asked. "No," she said. "Then no," I replied. "I don't want your help. I don't want anything from any of you." I walked away and I didn't see her again for 3 years. By year 4, something shifted inside me. I'd been angry at my father for years, burning, seething anger that kept me awake at night. But now I was becoming angry at myself. Angry at the fact that I'd let him destroy me. Angry at the fact that I was still letting him win. I started educating myself at the public library. I'd go there on my 1 day off per week, and I'd read business books, finance books, books about real estate and investing. I was going to figure out how to get out of this situation. I was going to build something. I was going to prove to my father and to myself that I wasn't worthless. In year 5, I met someone. Her name was Claire, and she worked at one of the restaurants where I was cleaning. She was kind, and she didn't pity me, and she seemed to see me as a person rather than as some tragic case. We became friends, and eventually something more. She didn't know my full story at first. I told her later about my family, about what happened, about why I was living the way I was living. "That's insane," she said when I told her. "Your father just threw you out?" "Pretty much," I replied. "That's not okay," she said. "That's abusive." I never thought about it as abusive before. I'd thought about it as punishment. I'd thought about it as something I deserved. But Claire made me realize that what my father had done was cruel. Deliberately, purposefully cruel. By year 6, I'd managed to save up enough money to start doing some small real estate deals. I bought a property that was in foreclosure, renovated it with my own hands during whatever free time I had, and sold it for a small profit. It took every penny I had and all my energy for months. But I made about $30,000. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I used that money to buy another property. And then another. I was working my cleaning jobs during the day and renovating properties at night. I was barely sleeping, barely eating, but I was building something. I was creating my path out. Claire tried to get me to slow down, to take care of myself better, but I couldn't. I was driven by something I didn't fully understand at the time. It was partly the desire to make money, but it was also something deeper. It was about proving something, about showing that I was capable of greatness regardless of what my father had done to me. By year 7, I'd started a small real estate company. Nothing fancy, just me doing deals, building relationships with contractors and investors. I was still cleaning buildings at night, but I was doing it less. as I made more money from my business. And then, in year 8, something happened that would change everything. I got a call from my mother. She sounded older, tired. "Your father's sick," she said without preamble. I said nothing. "Marcus, did you hear me? Your father is very sick. The doctors don't think he has much time." "Oh." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. And I was. Not because I cared about him, I didn't. But because I was sorry that this was happening. That illness was taking him before justice could. "He's asking for you," my mother continued. "He wants to see you before he dies. Why?" "I don't know. But he's been asking about you. Wondering what you've done with your life. Wondering if you've made something of yourself." I hung up the phone. I didn't call back for 2 weeks. And then one night, I got another call. It was my brother David. He was crying. "Marcus," he said, "Dad's dying. You need to come." "Why?" I asked. "Because he's our father. Because he's family." "He threw me out on the street," I replied coldly. He cut me off. He told everyone I was dead to him. Now that he's dying, suddenly he wants me to come visit? Suddenly I matter? "Please," David said, "just come. See him. If you still hate him after, I won't bother you again." Against my better judgment, I went. The house hadn't changed. It was still that massive mansion with the infinity pool and the tennis court and the perfect garden. The only difference was that it looked smaller to me now. Or maybe I was just bigger. Maybe I was no longer the person who fit into that world. My father was upstairs, in the master bedroom. I hadn't been upstairs in that house for 8 years. My room was still there, I imagined, probably converted into something else by now. A home office. A guest room. Definitely not my room anymore. I walked into his bedroom and I barely recognized him. He'd been a large man, imposing, someone who seemed to take up more space than was physically possible. Now he was small, shrunken, dying. He was lying in a hospital bed that had been set up in the middle of the room. Medical equipment surrounded him. A nurse was checking his vitals. When she saw me, she stepped back, understanding that this was a private moment. My father opened his eyes. He looked at me for a long moment without speaking. And then he smiled. A small, sad smile. "Marcus," he said. His voice was thin, weak. "You came. Mom said, you asked for me," I replied. "I didn't call him Dad. I didn't call him anything." "I did," he said. "I wanted to see what you'd become." I said nothing. I just waited. "Your mother told me about your real estate company," he continued. "She said you've been making deals. Building something." "Yes," I said. "I'm proud of you," he said. The words landed like a slap. After 8 years of abandonment, after 8 years of struggling, after 8 years of cleaning toilets and living in poverty while he lived in luxury, he was telling me he was proud of me. "Don't," I said. "Don't?" He asked. "Don't do this. Don't try to make this right. You can't. You threw me out. You destroyed my life. You can't fix that with a deathbed confession and some words about being proud." My father was quiet for a moment, and then he said something that changed everything. "I kept tabs on you," he said, "the whole time. I had people watching you. I know where you've been. I know what you've been doing. I know about every job you've worked, every property you've bought, every deal you've made. I felt my blood run cold. Why would you do that?" I asked. "Because you're my son," he said. "Despite everything, despite what I said, despite what I did, you're still my son. You kicked me out. You said I was dead to you." "I know," he replied. His voice was getting weaker, and he had to pause to catch his breath. And I was wrong. I was angry. I felt betrayed, Elena. ... Elena took something from me that I couldn't get back. My pride, my reputation, and I took it out on you because you were there and you were easy. But I watched you, Marcus. I watched you struggle, and I wanted to help you. But I didn't know. I was too proud. Could have just been my father, I said. You could have just swallowed your pride and been there. "I know," he said. "And I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. Apology meant nothing to me. Apologies don't undo 8 years. Apologies don't change the past. There's something else, my father continued. Something you need to know. I waited. My will, he said. I've changed it. Multiple times over the years, every time you've done something, achieved something, I've thought about what I wanted to do with my estate. 8 years ago, I left everything to David and Richard. I cut you out completely. But as I've watched your life unfold, I've changed it. Again and again. And now, ... He paused, fighting for breath. Now, most of my estate is going to you? I didn't believe him. I thought he was lying or confused or trying to manipulate me one final time. Why would you do that? I asked. Because you earned it, he said simply. You didn't get it handed to you. You didn't have it easy. You had to build something from nothing. That's more than David or Richard ever did. That's more than I would have done if I'd been born where you were born. You're the only one of my children who actually proved yourself. I don't want your money, I said. I know, he replied, but you're going to take it anyway. Because you're smart. And because you know what you can do with it. 3 weeks later, my father died. The will reading happened a week after the funeral. My brothers were shocked. My mother cried. The lawyers explained that approximately 70% of my father's estate, including his real estate holdings, his investment portfolio, and significant liquid assets, was going to me. The total value was approximately $2.1 billion. $2.1 billion. David and Richard got money. Sure. $100 million each. Enough to live comfortably for the rest of their lives. But it was nothing compared to what I was getting. They looked at me like I'd betrayed them. Like I'd somehow engineered this outcome. He felt guilty. I tried to explain to David afterward. He was trying to make up for what he did to me. That's not fair, David said, his face red with anger. We're his sons. We're the ones who stuck by him. He threw me out, I reminded him. For 8 years, I had nothing. And now you have everything, David replied bitterly. Lucky you. I didn't bother arguing. There was no point. David would never understand. He'd never had to understand. That night, I went back to my tiny apartment. The place I'd rented when I was working for minimum wage. The place I'd lived for the last few years while building my real estate business. It was quiet and small and real. I sat on my bed and I tried to process what had happened. I was a billionaire. I was a billionaire because my father had felt guilty. Because he'd spent 8 years watching me struggle, watching me fight, watching me refuse to break. And in the end, he decided that I'd earned it. But here's the thing about getting everything you ever wanted through tragedy, pain. It doesn't feel the way you think it will. I'd spent 8 years dreaming about the moment when I'd be rich enough not to worry about money. When I'd be successful enough that my father would regret what he'd done. When I'd be powerful enough that he couldn't touch me. And then he died, and it didn't feel triumphant. It felt hollow. But that's not where the story ends. Because while I was processing my sudden wealth, I was also processing something else. The knowledge that my father had done terrible things to my mother, to Elena, to countless people in his business dealings, then that he'd never really been held accountable. He died wealthy and respected and revered by most people who knew him. The scandal with Elena had hurt his reputation for a few months, but he'd weathered it. He'd survived it. And in the end, he'd won, or so I thought. About a month after inheriting the money, I decided to use it. Not to live a life of luxury, though I did some of that, I'm not going to lie, but to do something bigger. Something that mattered. I started investigating my father's business dealings. The hundreds of millions of dollars in his portfolio, where did they come from? I hired forensic accountants and lawyers and investigators. What I found was shocking and horrible and exactly what I'd suspected. My father had engaged in fraud. Real estate fraud, investment fraud, you name it. He'd pushed people out of their homes. He'd destroyed small businesses with predatory lending practices. He'd cheated his partners and stolen from his investors. The empire he'd built wasn't just built on ambition and hard work. It was built on the suffering of thousands of people. I took my findings to federal authorities. I cooperated fully with their investigation, and over the course of 2 years, the government froze a significant portion of my father's assets. They launched prosecutorial investigations into his company and his associates. My brothers were not happy about this. David actually confronted me about it. He said I was disgracing the family legacy. There is no legacy, I told him. There's just theft and fraud and cruelty, and someone needs to answer for it. That someone was our father, David said, and he's already dead, which is exactly why I'm doing this, I replied. Because he'll never face consequences in this life. But the people he hurt might get some restitution. The people he stole from might get some justice. That matters. The government's investigation resulted in the seizure of approximately $1.3 billion in assets. That money was put into a fund for victims of my father's fraudulent business practices. Hundreds of people received settlements. People who'd lost their homes. People who'd lost their life savings. People who'd been destroyed by my father's greed. I kept about $800 million. I set up a charitable foundation with most of it. I provided scholarships to kids who'd been kicked out of their homes. I funded support for homeless youth. I created programs to help people who were struggling with poverty and housing insecurity. I made sure that the money my father had stolen through fraud was used to help people who looked like I looked 8 years ago. Desperate, afraid, alone. It wasn't justice in the traditional sense. My father was dead. He'd never face trial. He'd never spend a day in prison. He'd never have to answer for what he'd done. But justice, I learned, isn't just about punishment. It's about making things right. It's about ensuring that the victims are cared for. It's about preventing future harm. It's about using power to help people instead of to hurt them. I also made peace with my mother. She'd stayed with my father despite everything, the affairs, the manipulation, the control. She'd wanted to leave, but she'd been trapped. I understood that now. I forgave her, not because I had to, but because I realized that she'd been a victim too. I'm sorry, she told me when I visited her at the house she'd moved into after my father died, a smaller house. Away from the mansion, I know, I replied. I should have protected you, she said. I should have been braver. You did the best you could, I told her, and I meant it. As for my brothers, we've maintained a cordial but distant relationship. They think I'm crazy for giving away so much money. They can't understand why I'd want to help poor people when I could be buying yachts and vacation homes. And I don't really expect them to understand. We come from the same family, but we don't share the same values. They never had to question those values because they never had to live without a safety net. I did. Here's what I want you to know. Whoever you're listening to this, I don't tell this story because I want your pity. I'm not looking for you to feel bad for me. 8 years of suffering was worth it if it means I can help other people avoid that same suffering. I tell this story because my father was a powerful man who used his power to hurt people, and for decades, he faced no real consequences. The scandal about Alina hurt his reputation for a while, but it didn't destroy him. It didn't stop him from making money, from being respected, from living a comfortable and luxurious life. But here's the thing about power. It's not actually real. It's just an agreement. It's just people agreeing that you matter. And the moment you lose that agreement, the moment people stop agreeing that you deserve power, it evaporates. My father died in his bed, in a comfortable home, surrounded by medical care. He never faced real justice, but his legacy was destroyed. His company is under federal investigation. His name is associated with fraud and exploitation. His money, the money he was so proud of, that he used to control people with, was seized by the government and given to his victims. Would he have wanted that? No. Does it matter? Not really. What matters is that the people he hurt are healing. The people he would have destroyed are being helped. The power that he accumulated through cruelty is being used for kindness. That's not revenge in the traditional sense. It's not a moment where I confront my father and he realizes what he's done and everything is fixed. Real life doesn't work that way. Real revenge is slower, more subtle, ultimately more satisfying than any dramatic confrontation could ever be. Real revenge is building something better. Real revenge is proving that you don't need to be like them to be successful. Real revenge is taking the suffering they caused and transforming it into something that helps others. My father kicked me out at 16. I cleaned toilets for 8 years. And through that struggle, through that pain, I learned what my father never learned. That power isn't measured in how much money you have or how many people you can control. Power is measured in how many people you can help, in how much good you can do, in the legacy you leave behind. My father left behind a legacy of fraud and exploitation. I'm building a legacy of healing and help. Someday when I'm gone, people will remember me not as the guy who got kicked out and became homeless. They'll remember me as the guy who used his resources to help people who were homeless. They'll remember me as someone who cared about justice for the victims, even when the perpetrator was his own father. And that, to me, is worth so much more than any amount of money. That's worth more than any revenge fantasy. That's the real victory if you're watching this and you're going through something similar. If you've been hurt by someone you trusted. If you've been betrayed by someone who was supposed to love you. If you're struggling and you feel alone, I want you to know something. Your suffering isn't permanent. Your circumstances aren't your destiny. The people who hurt you don't get to define who you become. You do. I spent 8 years in poverty. I cleaned toilets. I lived on the streets. I was abandoned and alone and desperate. But I didn't let that destroy me. I let it fuel me. I let it teach me. I let it show me what I never want to become. And now, the resources I have, I'm making sure that other people don't have to go through what I went through. That other young people who are kicked out of their homes can find shelter and support. That other people who are struggling can find hope. That's the real story here. Not my revenge against my father. Not his comeuppance. But the fact that I chose to transform my pain into purpose. I chose to take what happened to me and use it to help others. That's the lesson. That's what matters. That's the real triumph. My father thought power was about control. Power is about choice. I chose not to become him. I chose not to let his cruelty harden me into someone like him. I chose to be better, and every day I get to wake up knowing that my life has meaning, that my suffering had purpose, that I've helped people, that I've made a difference. That's worth more than all the money in the world. That's worth more than any revenge. And that's how an 8-year-old secret, 8 years of suffering, and a $2.1 billion inheritance became the best thing that ever happened to me.